And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
To go where no man has gone before, well, there's not many places on Earth left like that, but one of those places at one point was Mount Everest. Unfortunately, those days were to be the first to climb something are gone, and now many people attempt to climb Mount Everest. In this game, you are not necessarily a climber when you climb Mount Everest in this game, but you actually control two different guides. They're experienced guides who know how to climb this mountain, and they're taking with them amateurs who want to do well and climb this mountain, and rich people who are like, hey, I want to say I climbed Mount Everest. So your goal is to do that. Now this game is a sequel to another game from the same company called K2, in which you try to climb K2 without dying. And this one, it has a similar feel, in fact can be used as an expansion for the K2, but instead of you being the climber, you were taking groups of climbers. Let me show you. Okay, there's two sides to the board. This is the easier mountain way to climb the mountain, and then you have the more difficult way to climb the mountain. In this, each player is going to have two boards. So these are the two boards that you have. Each of these boards is matched by a corresponding figure. So you have Professor Squiggly Pants, and then you have Round Bottom here. And so both of them have a different marker. You actually have a third marker, and you'll use this marker to keep track of the points that you get. Now, as I said, you're both experienced climbers, and when you're at the bottom of the mountain, you'll be able to pick up equipment and stuff. You'll be able to take one of your camps up the mountain. You also can take oxygen bottles, and you can take different people with you to the top. There are two types of people that you can take with you to the top. There are these rich tourist guys. They're the yellow ones. You know, they're rich and they have a lot of money, and you get more points if you make it to the top and the bottom with them. But they're also, they're not as good at climbing the mountain. And then you have your amateur climbers, these are the purple ones. Now, you can only have so much room to carry things. So if you take your tent, then you can't carry anything in these first three rows. You can take the tent and one person or one oxygen tank. If you take one oxygen tank, then you have room for two more things. Two more oxygen tanks, or an oxygen tank or a person. Or you can take 4 people in general. Now, players each have their own deck of cards. This deck of cards is made up of various numbers, and they're going to draw from this deck of cards 6 cards. And at the beginning of each turn of the game, players are going to choose 3 of these cards that they have in their hand, and they're going to play them face down. Now, most of the cards are cards that give you movement points. Some only move in one direction. Some give you 2 if you move up, 3 if you move down. This gives you 3 in either direction, but you will lose an acclimatization point when you play this card. So there's different cards you can play. Everyone's going to take 3 and flip them up at the same time. At the top of the board, you're going to have 3 random risk tokens. And whoever plays the highest number of upwards movement in all the cards that they play is going to take one of the risk tokens. So obviously take a 0, because that has no effect at all. And when that's taken, it's replaced by another one. So eventually you'll be forced to take 1s and maybe even 2s. And if you take one of these risk tokens, it's going to subtract from the movement on your turn. Now, players are going to be spending their movement cards. We'll go in turn order. And they're going to climb up the mountain using their different climbers. And each space that you go into costs 1 to climb into that spot. But as you get higher up the mountain, you can see that some of the spots have yellow markers on them. Those cost 2 to go into. So there's different tracks of how you go up the mountain, but you can see some of the places are more treacherous than others. There's also down here what is called an ice shelf. At the beginning of the game, you're going to put all these tokens here on the ice shelf, and the first time someone goes into a token, you'll flip it over. And it's possible, you can see there, that that's a space that costs 2 to go into. Here's a bridge, you can just cost for free to go into those spots. And there is impassable terrain. So the first person to go through these area will basically find out what the ice shelf is like for this turn of the game. Now, a player can move his players in different directions. At the end of a round, players have all their campers or all the mountaineers that are coming with them. You're going to look at them, and each mountaineer that you get, when you pick them up at the bottom, they start at acclimatization level 1. Now, if you stop on a space on the board that has a blue circle in it, and you can see many of these spots at the bottom have blue circles in them, including the base camp down here, which is where everybody starts from, each of your climbers will gain 1 acclimatization point. If you get up to the top of the mountain, where those red numbers are, if you're in those spots, you will lose acclimatization points. Not only that, but you can play on a sunny day or a wintry day. So let's say we're playing on a wintry day. This is basically 2 cards that you're going to lay out next to each other, and each turn of the game is going to take place on one of these days, and once you get to the end of the first card, you move to the second card and you draw another one. And some days are sunny and fine, but other days, depending at what height you're at, so for example, this first one here, if I am between 6,000 and 7,000 feet on the mountain, you will lose 2 acclimatization points. Now, each of the different climbers, you can see yellow climbers can never go past 3, and purple climbers can never go past 4. You can go past them on your turn, but you'll always drop back down at the end of the turn. But if you go below 1, then your climber dies. And if your climber dies at any point during the course of this trip, then you lose points. Once a climber gets all the way to the top of the mountain, you make it up with them successfully, you will then take their token and you'll score 2 points for it, and then you'll flip it over to show that they made it to the top of the mountain, and you'll get more points when you bring it down. Now, the purple ones give 2 points up and down, the yellow ones give 3 points up and down, the purple ones you lose 3 points if they die, and the yellow ones you lose 4 points if you die. You can also spend a turn setting up a camp. You can leave people in the camp, and when you're inside the camp, your guys will gain 1 acclimatization, but you only have 2 of those, and you have to set them up on the spot. And you also can use these oxygen, whenever you put an oxygen marker in a tent, that oxygen marker can be used, and you have another smaller deck of acclimatization cards. And you'll be able to draw a certain number of cards, depending on how high you are in the mountain. Replace a card from your deck with one of these. These don't give you movement points. Instead, you can raise the acclimatization of one of your climbers on your team. And so that's basically how the game works. The game's going to take place over a certain number of turns based on how many days are in the weather pattern that you picked. At the end of those turns, whoever has the most points for taking people to the top of the mountain and bringing them back down to the bottom of the mountain. And you can keep doing back up and down. You can drop people off at the camps. You can switch climbers from camp to camp. And hopefully your deck will get well enough that you can get enough points doing this. The game also functions as an expansion board for the game K2. These flags here that say 2, 3s, and numbers all the way up to the top, they're not used in the Mount Everest game, but they're used in that game. And I should mention one more thing. Depending on how many players in the game depends on how many climbers can be in one spot at a time. So for example, there can only in a 5-player game, there can only be 3 people in each of these spots. Now for K2, I found K2 to be an interesting race game to go up and down. And it's really difficult not to compare it to Mount Everest because really they're the same theme. Mount Everest obviously has a more wide-known name recognition, the mountain, than K2 does, although they're both pretty famous. But the games themselves are fairly different. K2 is a somewhat simpler game, and Mount Everest has a lot of changes. One, you're taking groups of people at the mountain. I love the theme of that. I love trying to take a bunch of clueless rich people up as opposed to taking amateurs up. And I like the whole acclimatization thing that this game does. It's a really neat thing with the weather. You have 4 different ways to play the game. You can do easy sunny, hard sunny, easy winter, hard winter. That's lunacy to play hard winter. So the first time you should play on the easy side of the board in sunny weather. And you don't have to worry too much, but you're just trying to outmaneuver everybody else. There is some luck, obviously, in the cards that you draw, but for the most part, everyone has the same deck of cards. So that it will balance out. You just got to make the right choices as the game goes by, watching the weather, knowing when the best time to stay off different parts of the mountain are. The rules, I think, are a little convoluted with the carrying of the oxygen tanks and using oxygen tanks and acclimatization cards to your deck. That doesn't really make any kind of thematic sense. Don't get me wrong, I think using oxygen tanks makes sense to get oxygen, but these acclimatization cards get added to your deck once you use oxygen, and so then other people are, if later on, are using oxygen from that. It just didn't make any sense, and it's a really odd way to teach the game. When I teach this game and I explain it as a separate deck, and you can use that card when you go and drop an oxygen tank off in a camp and then use it at that camp, it's just, it works game-wise, but theme-wise it's odd, and it's kind of wonky. And in fact, that's the problem I have with Mount Everest. I played K2 and I played this one, and I said, hey, this one can be played for the K2 boards. But this one, I like the theme better. I like the idea of taking groups of people up to the top of the mountain, but it just felt, the theme never came through as strongly as I wanted to. There's all these people, and you're trying to do these right combinations and play cards and add cards to your deck, and it just felt like a little collection of mechanisms, and that race was never there. Unlike K2, where it was like, hey, let's just start running up the mountain, who's going to make the right move to get to the top. Here you're like, okay, let's pack up, and okay, I'm going to switch these guys over to this guide, and I'll set my camp. A lot of the mechanisms are the same, and they're all good. I'm not sure, other than theme, that any of the new mechanisms added to the game. I think this game is okay. I would play it, but I would rather play K2 or play this with the K2 rules. I mean, new mountain and new stuff, it's fine. The separating the acclimatization cards out of the deck might have sounded good, but it's less streamlined and more annoying, I think. Fantastic production values. The artwork is amazing. It's a cool idea. They managed to take the same game and add a wrinkle to it. I'm just not sure that wrinkle is something that I'm really interested in at this point in Mount Everest.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
Shut the door.
There.